Hi, I'm Philip from the HANA Academy. In this series of videos, we're looking at the graph processing capabilities native to SAP HANA. In this video, we're going to look at GraphScript language, which was introduced with HANA 2.0 SPS 0 for graph processing in HANA. Now, you're already familiar, I'm sure, that there are a number of graph algorithms provided by graph processing. You can see we've got neighborhood search, shortest path, strongly connected components, and pattern matching. And we've seen that with pattern matching, you can use the graphical editor, or with HANA 2.0, you can also use the Cipher query language. However, there may be other things that you want to do that are not included in these algorithms and that maybe are not so easy to do using pattern matching in the Cipher query language. For example, you might want to calculate some number. It's not just a simple query, but it's something a bit more complicated. You need to actually do some kind of programming, put some business logic into your scripting as you're getting data and looking and analyzing at data that's in the graph database with HANA. So to support that, we can use something called GraphScript language. So this language basically allows you to do your own programming and scripting to ease development and integration of complex graph algorithms into your own business applications and workflows. So it allows you to really code things at a much more detailed level and to do some quite advanced things. You'll see actually the reference guide for GraphScript goes through a whole set of syntax that exists. You can have data types, there's the general structure of a script. Basically, you're going to be working using stored procedures in HANA using SQL created stored procedures. However, the language you're going to use is Graph rather than using R-lang if you want to develop with R, for example, or there are other languages you can use. So these are going to be read-only, so reads SQL data, they're read-only, but we're going to use the language Graph, and then within the begin and end, you can embed your own GraphScript code. So that's how it works. We can see the structure. There are all sorts of types. You can do comments, expressions, etc., etc. It's really a full syntax. You've got statements. You can do loops. You can do branching. You've got all sorts of things. Something just to be careful about. You do have quite a number of reserved keywords, so don't use these as variable names. In fact, there's actually 4 different pages of reserved words. So just be careful. There's, I think, 5 pages of reserved words there. So do be careful about using reserved words, otherwise you may run into trouble. So let's have a look at an example of using the GraphScript. Let's go over to the Web Developer Workbench. In fact, we've got an example in the Academy in the GitHub repository for the Graph video series. So we're here in HANA Academy, Graph. You know from previous videos, getting started, how to get hold of this repository. Then in the code snippets, we've got graph 16 GraphScript. So here's a nice little example. What I'm going to do is go into raw, and then I can easily select it all and copy it. And now I'm just going to paste that into my SQL window in the catalog editor. Now what we can see here, we've got create procedure. So we're going to call it get num of daughters in underworld, because what our procedure is going to do, it's going to count us up the number of daughters that live in the underworld. Doesn't matter who their parents are, just all the daughters that live in the underworld. So it's a simple example of the kind of thing you could do with GraphScript, because you can do some nice looping in the if statements and stuff here. So the first thing you're going to need to do when you're working with this is, after defining the language Graph, is you're going to have your begin and end, and within that you're going to need to actually connect to your Graph workspace. So in the case here, there's a variable graph G, so it's of type graph, we called it G, and this is basically a graph type, and its Greek methodology is a schema, comma, and then as the next literal, graph is the name of our graph workspace. That's something we created in a previous video. Of course, you change that based on what graph workspaces you have. So that's how we can access our graph workspace. We obviously need to connect to that first. And after that, it's completely up to us how we want to work. For example, we've used an alter statement here to add a temporary virtuic attribute, which is Boolean, which is lives in underworld. and by default it's false, because we're going to go through checking, because we don't actually have a property saying, are you a god that lives in the underworld? We're going to have to go out and find them in this example. Or you a daughter who's a god that lives in the underworld? So if we go to the next line, line 8, we can see we've got a for each. So basically that's the way we can do looping. So we'll loop around with a curly brace to finish it. For each in the edges of our graph. So we're going to go through all of the edges. They're all of the connections basically. And as we loop around that, we're going to look for a source and a target vertex. So a node. So that will be a vertex type. And then we're going to have a Boolean, which is a yes or no, are gods. So we want to identify firstly that the source and target, so basically the two vertex are gods, so the parents are gods. And then we'll see if actually they're gods and one of them has a daughter, okay, which is actually an edge attribute. So having the daughter is an attribute. It's not on the vertex, but it's actually the connection to whoever that daughter would be. So if they're gods and has a daughter, then we need to check what the residence is of that. So we look at the target residence. So we see it's underworld, and we see the source is underworld. So we can see that the parents live in the underworld, and then we can go through again here. If we obviously we don't want to go through this loop for everything in the database if we already finished, so we'll just, with this if statement, we'll just make sure we don't go too many times. We'll add one to our count and we'll set that the target lives in the underworld, so we won't need to check that one again in the future. We don't want to count the same thing twice if we come across the same one more than once. So that's all we have to do. We can just run this. It'll loop round. It'll we've got branching. We've got with these 3 if statements. We've got looping with the for each. We're accessing our graph workspace. We're going to count up, and basically when it's finished running, we're going to have a value which is our count, which is our output parameter. It's an integer, and that will be the number of daughters that live in the underworld. So we can make a call. Line 24, we've got call for our procedure name with a question mark because we've got a parameter in there. And what we should now see just directly in our result set is the number, and hopefully it's going to be 1 if this is working correctly. So let's give it a run. And we can see that the code runs, and we've got our result back, and count is indeed 1. So there's only one basically daughter of gods that's also a god that lives in the underworld. So that's just an example where we've now seen how you can use GraphScript, which is quite complex and very powerful language, to really make completely custom types of analytics and reporting algorithms against data that you've got. Okay, so that's it. We've now seen our first example of GraphScript. This is new with HANA 2.0 SPS 0. Thanks for watching. You'll find more videos and playlists on our YouTube channel. Also, consider following us on Twitter or connect with us on LinkedIn.